courtroom was silent, as if the air itself had frozen in anticipation. Then, bang! The gavel struck down, a sharp wooden crack that echoed across the paneled chamber. Heads turned. Every camera light along the press row blinked red in unison, tiny beacons capturing the moment. And then, Elena Brooks made her move. At 48, she was dressed in a navy suit, too sleek, too polished, like someone arriving for a gala rather than a custody hearing. She walked with a predator's confidence, heels clicking like nails on marble. When she reached the plaintiff's table, she slammed down a glossy Prada handbag. The impact jolted the wood. Papers spilled out in a deliberate cascade, bank forms, invoices, and one flimsy slip that fluttered to the floor. The clerk bent instinctively but froze. The slip was not just a receipt. It was a spa invoice, ink still vivid. Luxury renewal package, $640. The camera nearest the aisle caught the angle perfectly. A single zoom. A pause. As if the lens itself knew this would not be forgotten. Elena's lips curled, her voice a serrated whisper that still carried across the hushed chamber. 17 years. And now, you owe me $12,480. Every cent of it. Maya Brooks sat across the aisle, barely 19, her back pressed into the wooden bench, hands trembling in her lap. The courtroom light made her look younger, fragile, like a shadow of the child she had once been when her mother vanished. She blinked rapidly, as if the words themselves were too heavy to carry. Beside her sat Chloe Carter, 28, the woman who had raised her when Elena disappeared. Chloe's dark hair was pulled into a tight knot, her suit practical, but her eyes burned like coals. Where Maya flinched, Chloe leaned forward, shoulders squared, gaze locked onto Elena like a shield forged from fury itself. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, a mother who had abandoned, returned polished and venomous, demanding money as if it were a birthright. On the other, a girl trembling under the weight of betrayal, and a sister, not by blood, ready to fight tooth and nail. The smell of varnished oak lingered in the air, almost metallic under the buzz of old fluorescent lights. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter's pen scratched furiously against paper. The only other sound was Maya's heartbeat thudding so loud in her chest she thought the microphones might pick it up. Elena didn't sit. She stood tall, drawing out each word with poisonous precision. For 17 years, I sacrificed. For 17 years, I provided. And now she jabbed a manicured finger toward Maya, must repay her debt. The gallery stirred, murmurs rippling through the benches. A judge's warning glance silenced them, but not before the tension had spread like wildfire. Chloe slammed her palm flat on the defense table. The crack was sharp, defiant. "That's a lie," she spat. "You left her. You left us." The gavel came down again. "Order in the court," the judge barked. His voice was practiced, steady, but there was a flicker in his eyes, like even he sensed the absurdity in what he just heard. Elena smirked. "Of course she would say that. She's not family. She's just a stray who clung to what wasn't hers." The words sliced through Maya like glass. For a moment, she almost sank into the wood beneath her, wishing she could disappear. But Chloe's hand found hers, firm, grounding. The Prada handbag sat gaping open, its leather mouth exposing the life Elena had lived in absence. Receipts for sunglasses, phone bills, and spa treatments stacked neatly like trophies. And there, still lying face up on the polished floor, that spa invoice glowed under the fluorescent light. Nobody picked it up. Not yet. But everyone's eyes had seen it. Maya's breath came shallow, her pulse a hammer in her ears. She tried to steady herself, but Elena's words coiled tighter and tighter around her chest. The accusation wasn't just money. It was a rewriting of her life. A life of growing up without bedtime stories, without birthday calls, without the sound of a mother's voice. And now, that same mother stood here, demanding repayment for years she had never lived. Elena leaned across the plaintiff's table, her perfume sweet but suffocating. "You've had an education, a roof, food. Who do you think paid for it?" The silence that followed was razor-thin. Chloe's lips parted to answer, but Maya surprised them both. Her voice, barely above a whisper, cracked through the chamber. "Not you. Not you." Elena froze. Her painted smile faltered. The red camera lights blinked harder, zooming closer, recording every twitch, every bead of sweat. Maya's chest rose and fell, courage surging where fear had lived moments ago. Her gaze fixed not on her mother but on the judge, as if pleading for the truth itself to be heard. The second act of the trial began not with evidence but with performance. Elena Brooks rose from her chair, smoothing the lapel of her suit as though adjusting a costume before the curtain rose. She tilted her chin, drew a sharp breath, and let her voice drip with practiced fragility. As a mother, 2 words, heavy with false nobility. 2 words she would repeat over and over, weaving herself into the martyr she wanted the court to see. As a mother, I carried the weight no one else would. I stayed up nights worrying. I worked double shifts. I put food on the table, clothes on her back, gave her the chance at a future. And now, after 17 years, it is time for recognition. Her hand trembled as if with suppressed emotion, but the tremor was rehearsed. Each syllable was perfectly measured for sympathy. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some leaned forward, nodding almost instinctively, as if parental sacrifice were sacred currency no one dared to question. At the plaintiff's table, her attorney, Mr. Harlan, seized the moment. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, stepping into the echo of Elena's performance. "Your Honor," Harlan said gravely, "this is not merely a financial dispute. This is a matter of recognition. My client gave her youth, her labor, her health for a daughter who now refuses to acknowledge it. She is owed $12,480, barely a fraction of what she spent ensuring Maya had food, clothes, and opportunity." Elena dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. The tears were dry, but the act was convincing enough. Across the aisle, Maya shrank further into her chair. She felt the words like blows: sacrifice, recognition, owed. Each one scraped against her memory, memories that looked nothing like what Elena described. Nights of hunger, of Chloe scrounging paychecks to cover groceries, of birthdays celebrated with homemade cards because there was never money for gifts. Chloe's nails dug crescents into her palm. Her jaw tightened. She could no longer sit still. She shot to her feet, fire flashing in her eyes. "That's a lie," she shouted, her voice cracking through the chamber. "You abandoned her. You never paid for her food, her clothes, her future. You weren't there." The outburst electrified the room. Gasps flared from the gallery. The judge's gavel hammered down with a deafening crack. "Order. Miss Carter, one more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt." Chloe's chest heaved. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to sit. But her glare stayed locked on Elena, a warning that the truth was not so easily buried. Elena's smirk returned, thin and victorious. She turned back to the bench, shifting seamlessly back into her martyr script. "As a mother," she continued, "I made sacrifices no one could ever measure. I skipped meals so she could eat. I walked to work so she could have bus fare. I gave up dreams so she could have hers." The repetition was deliberate. Sacrifice, 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 sacrifice. Each time she stacked the word higher, like bricks in a wall meant to trap Maya inside. But even walls had cracks. The defense table had already begun reviewing the bank statements Elena had submitted. Buried among line items for groceries and utilities, neat, plausible expenses was a glaring anomaly. Broadway tickets, $1,200. It sat there like a spark in dry timber, waiting to ignite. Chloe's eyes caught it immediately, and her lips twisted into a grim smile. She made no move to raise it yet. Timing mattered. Evidence was a blade best drawn at the perfect moment. "For now," Elena's theater continued. "As a mother," Elena sighed, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest, "I endured loneliness, poverty, ridicule, all for her. And what do I receive in return? Disrespect, ingratitude." She sits there, silent, as if I were nothing, as if 17 years of sacrifice were dust. Harlan stepped closer to the jury box, his tone sharpened with righteous indignation. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the tragedy of modern society. Parents give, children forget. My client does not ask for riches, only reimbursement for what she has already given. A mere $12,480 for 17 years of devotion." The jury, though not yet called to deliberate, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Devotion was a powerful word. Few wished to believe a mother could lie so completely. But truth had its own witnesses. The defense's first call was Mrs. Evelyn Rhodes, a neighbor from Maya's childhood. She was in her 60s, hair gray, voice steady. She raised her hand, swore the oath, and settled into the witness chair. Chloe leaned forward. "Mrs. Rhodes, during the years in question, did you ever see Elena Brooks residing with Maya?" Mrs. Rhodes pursed her lips, her eyes narrowing at Elena. "No," she said firmly. "We never saw her. Not once. It was Chloe who came and went, Chloe who took Maya to school, Chloe who paid the landlord when rent came due. Elena was never there." The gallery erupted again. This time, the murmurs carried suspicion rather than sympathy. Elena shifted in her seat, her mask slipping for the first time. "That woman doesn't know," Elena began, but the judge cut her off. "You will wait your turn, Ms. Bikai." "Brooks." Maya's chest swelled with a flicker of relief. Someone else had spoken her truth aloud. For a moment she felt less alone, yet Elena was relentless. She leaned into the microphone, voice dripping venom disguised as heartbreak. "As a mother," she repeated, though her tone sharpened now, "I did what I could with what I had. If receipts are questioned, it is because survival sometimes requires unusual choices. I bought tickets, yes, but for her birthday. I bought sunglasses because I wanted her to feel beautiful. I bought a phone so she could call me anytime, but she didn't." Her eyes darted toward Maya, piercing, accusatory. The weight of the gaze crushed down on the 19-year-old. Guilt, undeserved, pooled in her stomach. For a heartbeat, she almost wondered, had she misunderstood? Had she been blind to some invisible effort? But then Chloe's hand steadied hers again. The warmth was grounding. The truth was steady, even if lies shouted louder. The judge shifted in his seat, eyes scanning the documents on record. His brow furrowed. "Miss Brooks," he said slowly, "you claim sacrifice. You claim sacrifice. But these statements, well, the court will examine them closely. For now, continue." Elena drew another deep, ragged breath, summoning tears that did not come. "As a mother," she whispered, softer this time, "I gave everything, and now I stand accused, mocked, painted as a villain, but all I ever wanted was for my daughter to have a chance." The silence after was suffocating. In the back row, a journalist scrawled the word "sacrifice" across his notepad, underlined twice. To the casual ear, Elena sounded convincing. To the attentive, her script had become obvious, the refrain of someone building a lie brick by brick. Chloe leaned back, her mind racing. She knew the time would come to dismantle the wall Elena was building. And when it did, it would fall with the weight of every receipt, every inconsistency, every witness who remembered the truth. For now, the lie stood tall, casting its long shadow across Maya, who sat silent beneath it. But in the scattered papers, in the spa invoice lying forgotten, and in the single damning line, "Broadway tickets, 1200," the truth was already waiting, sharp as glass, ready to cut through the illusion. For nearly an hour, Elena's voice had been the loudest in the room. Her repetitions, "as a mother, as a mother, as a mother, as a mother," had echoed like a hymn, building the illusion of sacrifice brick by brick. But illusions, like glass, shatter when pressed too hard. And then Maya stood. It wasn't dramatic, no sweeping gesture, no pounding of fists. She simply pushed her chair back and rose, her palms still trembling, her shoulders still small inside her blazer. The room did not notice her at first, but when she spoke, the chamber froze. Her voice was low, even steady. It was not the sound of a frightened girl. It was the sound of a mind sharpened by years of quiet observation, a voice she had hidden until the moment mattered most. "Your Honor," Maya said, enunciating each syllable with surprising clarity, "I request a preservation order for the bank records covering the years 2006 through 2023. The judge's head lifted sharply. His eyes narrowed, brows arched. Silence dropped like a curtain. Even the faint scribbling of reporters' pens stopped. Elena scoffed. "She doesn't even know what she's asking for," she sneered, her voice breaking the quiet. But Maya did not falter. She clasped her hands in front of her, steadying them, her gaze fixed on the bench. "Under Title 18 of the United States Code," she continued, "misuse of survivor benefits constitutes fraud. These were never her funds to spend." Gasps flickered across the gallery. Survivor's benefits. Fraud. Words heavy enough to tilt the entire case. Elena's composure cracked. "Fraud? FRAU'd?" she barked, voice jagged with rage. "She's a child. She doesn't understand what sacrifice means." Pressed, Maya did not look at her. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she pressed on, the calmness in her tone a knife sharper than anger. In Smith v. Bowen, Maters and Haven, 1987, Mia recited, her memory unflinching. "The court held that survivor benefits are a trust for the child, not discretionary income for the guardian. The money belongs to the minor, not the caretaker. That precedent is binding, Your Honor." The citation landed like a thunderclap. Chloe turned, eyes wide with pride she barely contained. Reporters scrambled to note the case, flipping through law references. Elena laughed bitterly, the sound brittle, desperate. "This is absurd. She's parroting nonsense. She was 9 when her father died. 9. She doesn't know the first thing about law." "She's just a child." Finally, Maya turned to her. Her voice dropped, lower, firmer, weighted with steel. "Children grow," she said. Her words hung heavy, deliberate. "Evidence does not vanish." The chamber erupted with whispers. The contrast was visceral. Elena's shrill hysteria clashing against Maya's quiet certainty. One shouted, the other whispered, and yet the whisper carried farther. The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Miss Brooks," he asked slowly, "are you prepared to substantiate these claims?" "Braptor, Clodo." Maya nodded once, without hesitation. "If needed," she said, "I can show the court exactly where those checks were supposed to go, because I was never as powerless as she thought." Her words detonated. The gallery, once sympathetic to Elena's performance, shifted visibly. Faces turned toward Maya with new recognition. She was not the trembling victim painted by her mother. She was a witness, a survivor, and now, perhaps, a litigator in her own right. Elena's attorneys scrambled to regain ground. Harlan adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. The defendant is not a licensed attorney. She cannot simply—" The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "I am aware of procedure, Mr. Harlan." But I'm also aware that this young woman has cited federal statute and precedent correctly. That alone warrants consideration." A hush fell again. Cameras zoomed in on Maya's face, capturing the subtle transformation, the quiver in her jaw replaced by resolve, the hesitation in her eyes replaced by fire. Elena, panicking, leaned across her table. "She's manipulating you," she hissed, jabbing a finger toward Maya. "This is all an act. She doesn't understand sacrifice. She doesn't understand what I gave up." But the word sacrifice, once her anchor, now rang hollow. Each repetition sounded less like virtue, more like a mask cracking under weight. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but devastating. "Real mothers don't spend survivor checks on Broadway tickets." The line hit harder than any legal citation. It was personal, irrefutable, and everyone in the room had already seen the receipt buried in the records. The image of $1,200 spent on theater seats burned in the minds of all present, clashing violently against Elena's self-portrait of deprivation. The judge's gavel struck once, not for order, but for emphasis. "We will enter a preservation order on the record," he declared. "Bank records from 2006 through 2023 are to be secured pending further review." A collective inhale swept the courtroom. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing, of sympathy being stripped away. Elena slumped back into her chair, her mask slipping completely now. The tremble in her hands was no longer rehearsed. Chloe reached for Maya's shoulder, whispering fiercely, "You did it. You just turned the tide." "Porchk." Maya did not smile. She did not cry. She only stood taller, letting the silence confirm what the world had just witnessed. The moment a girl, once powerless, had found her voice and used it like a blade. The chamber was already thick with tension, but it tightened further when Chloe Carter stood. Her chair scraped softly against the polished floor, but the sound seemed to slice through every whisper. She moved with quiet precision, a woman carrying not just conviction but something heavier, hidden. In her hand was a sealed envelope, thick, cream-colored, wax-stamped. She held it like it weighed more than paper should. The judge peered down, curious. "Miss Carter?" Chloe's eyes did not leave Elena's. They were steady, unblinking, a stare forged from 17 years of broken promises and sleepless nights. "Your Honor," she said, voice calm but edged with steel, "I have here a document that must be entered into the record. It concerns my standing in this case, and Maya's protection." A murmur rippled across the gallery. Reporters leaned forward. Camera lights blinked faster, hungry. The bailiff crossed the floor and took the envelope from Chloe, delivering it up the steps to the bench. The judge broke the seal with deliberate care, sliding the papers free. His brow furrowed as his eyes scanned the text. Then he reached for the overhead light. The chamber brightened as he tilted the document under its glare. Gold embossing caught the beam, shimmering across the official header. United States, District Court, District of New Jersey. Cracks crackled like sparks in the air. The judge's voice deepened, heavy with the authority of revelation. "This is a federal appointment." He adjusted his glasses, reading aloud. Chloe Carter was appointed guardian ad litem for Maya Brooks, under seal in 2006, upon petition following the disappearance of her biological mother. The courtroom stilled. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Maya's head whipped toward Chloe, eyes wide. She had known Chloe was her protector, her caretaker, her family, but not this. Not that the courts had entrusted her fate to Chloe long ago. Chloe's voice cut the silence. "I was appointed to protect Maya when her mother disappeared," she said evenly. "And I never stopped." Her words hung like a verdict in themselves. Elena staggered back a step, her chair screeching against the floor. The color drained from her face. No, this is fabricated." "A stunt," she snapped, her voice shrill, unraveling. The judge slammed his gavel once. "Enough." But Chloe wasn't finished. She reached into her blazer and pulled a second card, a laminated badge, edges worn, its seal unmistakable. She laid it gently on the defense table, the gold crest catching the fluorescent lights. The cameras zoomed, lenses clicking furiously. On its face, the words gleamed. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. The gallery erupted. Shock ricocheted from wall to wall, people whispering furiously, craning for a better view. The judge's eyes widened. "Miss Carter, you were employed by the DOJ?" Chloe nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. I served as counsel in the Civil Rights Division. My expertise was in guardianship abuse and mismanagement of survivor benefits." The weight of those words crashed into the courtroom. This was no longer a story of a mother and daughter. This was a federal shadow cast across a state case, a woman whose professional life had been dedicated to exposing the very fraud Elena was accused of. Elena's laugh was hollow, broken. This is entrapment. A setup. She's been plotting against me all these years." But her voice faltered. Her eyes were wide, darting to the gold seal still gleaming under the light. To the badge on the table, undeniable. Her own reflection shimmered faintly in its surface, distorted, accusing. Slow motion stretched the moment. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. A bead of sweat traced down Elena's temple. The red recording lights blinked, capturing every fracture in her composure. For 17 years, she had been the absent figure, the ghost who vanished into self-indulgence. Now, in the glare of federal authority, she was no longer the accuser. She was the accused. The transformation was complete, from plaintiff to suspect, from sacrificing mother to potential felon. The judge's voice rang out, firm and commanding. The court acknowledges Miss Carter's standing. Her guardianship is entered into record, effective retroactively, and her testimony will be weighted accordingly. Furthermore, the Department of Justice connection is duly noted. The gallery buzzed like a hive. Headlines were already forming in the minds of reporters. Guardian ad litem exposes fraud. DOJ counsel steps into family court. Elena Brooks collapses under federal spotlight. C. Elena swayed on her feet, clutching the table for balance. Her eyes were wild, unmoored, searching the chamber for an ally. But the gallery no longer looked at her with sympathy. They looked with suspicion, even pity. Her lips trembled. You were supposed to be family. Chloe met her gaze without blinking. I was, she replied coldly. Family doesn't vanish for 17 years. Family doesn't steal from a child's future. Family protects. And I did. The words were knives, each syllable carving away the last of Elena's illusions. The courtroom sat frozen in the aftermath, the hierarchy inverted. The once silent sister now stood revealed as a federally appointed guardian, backed by the weight of the Department of Justice. The once commanding mother shrank into her chair, cornered by truth, stripped of her stage. And Maya, watching from beside Chloe, saw her world rearrange itself in real time. For the first time in the trial, she wasn't trembling. She was steady. Her protector's truth had become her shield. The spa invoice still lay tucked among the records. The Broadway tickets, the sunglasses, the phones, all of it was waiting to surface. But the balance had already shifted. Elena had lost her power. The cameras lingered on her face as realization dawned. She was not the plaintiff anymore. She was prey. The courtroom's rhythm changed the moment Chloe Carter rose again, this time with a stack of files clutched in her arms. There was no tremor in her hands, no hesitation in her stride. She walked with the certainty of someone who knew her next move was fatal, not to herself, but to the carefully constructed illusion of the woman across the aisle. Your Honor, Chloe said firmly, setting the files on the defense table. The defense moves to admit Exhibit B, comprehensive bank statements covering the years 2006 through 2023, pertaining to the survivor benefits of the late Daniel Brooks. A hush fell. The bailiff carried the stack to the clerk. Pages shuffled, the thick sound of paper carrying more weight than any shouted accusation. The judge adjusted his glasses, nodding. Exhibit B is admitted. Chloe exhaled slowly, then pressed the button on the courtroom projector remote. The lights dimmed slightly as the first document lit up the screen. It was stark, clinical columns of numbers, rows of transactions. But when highlighted, the story it told was devastating. A red square boxed in the first line. Luxury spa, $600. A loud electronic beep accompanied the highlight. The sound echoed, each note like a heart monitor announcing the truth's return to life. Whispers surged through the gallery. The next page appeared. Broadway tickets. $1,200. Beep, gasps. Some jurors exchanged glances. Reporters scribbled frantically. Another page. Designer sunglasses. $8.99. Peep. The pattern was hypnotic. Every transaction, another blow. The screen shifted again, projecting the largest figure yet. iPhone and plan, $2,400. Sexist. Beep. The judge's voice broke the silence. Strong, resonant. These were survivor benefits from Maya's late father. They were intended for food, for housing, for education. Instead, he turned sharply toward Elena. Instead, you squandered them. The words detonated in the chamber. Elena's painted composure shattered. She slumped into her chair, one hand clutching her temple. The color drained from her cheeks until she looked almost translucent under the fluorescent glare. Chloe pressed the button again. The projector shifted to a new format, a timeline. Across the screen stretched the years 2006 through 2023, each year marked not by milestones of growth or education, but by indulgence. Sex 2007, luxury spa, 600 time eye to 5 all in 9. Broadway tickets, 1,200. Designer sunglasses, $8.99 Tonasash to 14. High-end salon membership, $1,050. Chew and 16. Caribbean cruise deposit, $3,700. 2019. Premium smartphone package, $2,400. 2021. Luxury handbag purchase, $2,095. The audience followed the glowing line as it crawled forward year after year. A life of extravagance purchased with money meant to feed, clothe, and educate a child. Each highlight came with the same piercing beep. Tss, like a pulse, like a countdown. The judge leaned forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the bench. His voice was grave. This is not sacrifice. This is theft. Elena shook her head violently, stammering. No, those were necessities, gifts, memories. Her words fell flat. Chloe clicked again. The projector froze on one particular year, 2001. The transaction glowed. Broadway tickets, $1,200. Chloe's voice cut through the dark like a blade. That was the year Maya turned 7. Do you remember where she spent her birthday? Maya's throat tightened. Her voice was small, but clear. At home. With a cupcake Chloe baked from a $1 box mix. Mom wasn't there. The words silenced the room. Elena collapsed against her chair, muttering, lies, all lies, all lies. The timeline rolled on, implacable. 2007, each year punctuated by indulgence. Each transaction, another nail in the coffin of Elena's credibility. The screen darkened, then displayed the totals. Total survivor benefits, $48,000. Verified misuse, $27,888. The numbers glared across the wall like a verdict written in fire. The judge's gavel struck once, resonant. This ledger doesn't spell sacrifice, he declared, his voice reverberating through the chamber. It spells self-indulgence. The phrase cut deeper than any evidence. It was the judge himself condemning Elena's narrative with finality. Elena whimpered, clutching her bag, the same Prada handbag that had spilled its damning spa receipt at the start of trial. Now it sat like a carcass of vanity, emblem of a life spent feeding appetite instead of obligation. Maya watched, her breath steady for the first time. Every beep, every line of evidence was a vindication, proof she hadn't imagined the neglect, proof Chloe's sacrifices had not been in vain. Chloe closed the file, her voice unwavering. Your Honor, this evidence shows a pattern of misappropriation spanning nearly 2 decades. Survivor benefits meant for Maya's care were siphoned into personal luxuries. This is not parental sacrifice. It is systemic fraud. The gallery buzzed again, not with doubt, but with outrage. Parents exchanged horrified glances, imagining their own children betrayed in the same way. Reporters mouthed headlines under their breath. Elena buried her face in her hands. The woman who had walked in with Prada and perfume, dripping with superiority, now shook in disgrace. The receipts of her indulgence projected larger than life for all to see. The montage slowed, ending with one final receipt displayed alone. Luxury spa, $640. The very invoice that had slipped from her bag at the opening of trial. The circle was complete. The red camera lights blinked, capturing the collapse of a false narrative. Every angle recorded, every whisper preserved. The evidence was no longer just documents. It was a story of absence, of betrayal, of indulgence masquerading as sacrifice. And now it was undeniable. Elena Brooks, once the accuser, sat visibly crushed under the weight of her own lies. And Maya Brooks, once trembling, finally exhaled, knowing the truth had been carved into record, permanent, irrevocable. The receipts were damning, but Chloe Carter wasn't finished. She had exposed Elena. Now she would expose the machine that allowed Elena to thrive unchecked. She rose slowly, collecting herself, and stepped toward the projection screen. The clerk handed her a remote. The room dimmed again, the whir of the projector filling the silence. Your Honor, Chloe began, her tone shifting from defender to prosecutor of a larger crime. This is not just about one mother misusing survivor benefits. This is about a system that has been failing children for decades. Click. The screen lit up with stark white text on a black background. 50 million misused survivor funds last decade. Sacks rippled through the chamber. The figure blazed across the wall, impossible to ignore. This, Chloe said, gesturing to the words, is what happens when oversight fails. $50 million intended for food, housing, and education for grieving children, diverted. Spent on vacations, luxuries, and indulgence. And in most cases, it goes unnoticed. Checks. Click. The slide shifted. Purchases, never audited. 25% of survivor benefit cases in the United States, Chloe explained, are never subject to a single audit. That means 1 in 4 children may never know if the money meant for them was stolen. 1 in 4 families may never know the truth. The gallery murmured. Parents squeezed their children's hands. Reporters leaned so close to their laptops that their noses nearly touched the keys. Click. The final slide appeared. 12 states under federal review. The Department of Justice has already imposed consent decrees on 12 states, Chloe continued, for systemic mismanagement of funds. Everything from orphan support trusts to foster care stipends. The patterns are identical. Money for the vulnerable, redirected for the powerful. And every year, children pay the price. The judge leaned forward, his hand stroking his chin. His voice was low, cautious, but curious. Miss Carter, are you suggesting this case is part of the national pattern? Chloe turned from the screen, her gaze sweeping across the chamber, making eye contact with jurors, reporters, even the bailiffs who now stood a little straighter. "I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor. I'm proving it. Elena Brooks is not an anomaly. She is a symptom." Her words hung taut as wire. Elena stirred weakly from her seat. "You can't compare me to criminals in other states." "I'm a mother," Chloe cut her off, her voice sharp yet still calm. "Fraud is not a family problem. It's a national epidemic." The gallery erupted again, but this time it wasn't outrage at Chloe. It was agreement. Murmured phrases carried. "Epidemic. Epidemic." The word stuck, branded into the atmosphere. Chloe clicked the remote again. The screen split into 3 columns like a miniature infographic displayed in court. Column 1, 50M misused survivor funds in the last decade. PSA. Column 2, G1 in 4 cases never audited. Marker. Quote, "Coplication Cs. Under federal review." Each statistic pulsed, highlighted with a dull red glow. It looked less like a presentation, more like a warning flare. "This," Chloe said, pointing, "is not designed by accident. It's designed by neglect. Survivor benefits are treated as discretionary income instead of what the law says they are, a trust for the child. And in that void, predators thrive." The judge nodded gravely. A juror whispered audibly, "Blacker." "Okay." Elena's shoulders curled inward. Chloe advanced a step, her voice lowering, intimate now, speaking not just to the bench but to every parent, every child watching. "This isn't about one Broadway ticket. It isn't about one spa trip. It's about what happens when an entire system looks away. Children are told they're cared for, that safety nets exist, but behind the paperwork, behind the numbers, futures are being sold for luxury." The reporters were no longer scribbling. They were staring, riveted. Chloe wasn't just dismantling Elena's lie. She was rewriting the narrative of an entire system. "Maya is one voice," Chloe said softly, turning to look at her sister. "But behind her are thousands of silenced children, some too young to know, some too frightened to speak, some already grown, carrying scars they shouldn't have had to bear." Maya's eyes brimmed, but she held them steady. She wouldn't break now. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel once, not to silence, but to punctuate. "The court recognizes the systemic implications raised." Elena's lawyer, pale and sweating, stammered. "Objection, Your Honor, this is beyond the scope." "Overruled," the judge snapped. "The scope is the truth." "Kill." Chloe pressed the final button. The screen faded to black, replaced with one simple sentence in bold white font. "This is not one mother's mistake. This is a design." The chamber inhaled as one. The sentence was less evidence, more manifesto. Chloe let the silence expand, then spoke the final line. "Fraud does not stop at the front door of a family home. It seeps into systems, into courts, into governments. And unless we confront it, unless we break the design, it will continue to steal futures one receipt at a time." "Ha!" Her words landed like a closing argument, though the trial wasn't finished. The gallery erupted into hushed applause before the bailiff barked them back to order. But the impact was irreversible. This was no longer just Elena versus keyboard, Maya. It was fraud versus children. It was system versus justice. And Chloe Carter had just drawn the battlefield lines. The courtroom was silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't anticipation. It was judgment hovering in the air, heavy and undeniable. The judge leaned forward, both hands gripping the bench as though anchoring the entire weight of the law. His face, stern and lined with years of rulings, was unreadable. But when he spoke, his voice resonated with authority that carried beyond the walls, into history itself. "This court has heard enough." Elena stiffened in her chair. "Oh!" Her nails dug into the armrests, the last fragments of defiance flickering in her eyes. The judge continued, slow and deliberate. "The evidence is clear. Survivor benefits intended for Maya Brooks, the daughter left behind after the death of her father, were not used for her well-being. They were misappropriated for luxuries, for indulgence, for self-satisfaction. This was not sacrifice. This was theft." Gasps rippled across the gallery. Elena shook her head violently. "No, that's not." The gavel slammed once, silencing her. "Ms. Brooks, you will remain quiet while I deliver this ruling." "She shrank back, lips trembling. The judge's gaze swept across the courtroom, past the lawyers, past the spectators, pausing on Maya. His expression softened just slightly, then hardened again as he turned back to the plaintiff's table. "Elena Brooks, this court orders you to repay the full amount of survivor benefits misused, $27,880 plus accrued interest, bringing the total to $42,600. Payment is to be made into a trust in Maya Brooks's name." Elena's face crumpled. Her perfectly painted lips parted, but no words came. Furthermore, the judge went on, you were stripped of any legal standing as Maya Brooks's representative, guardian, or claimant. You forfeited that role when you abandoned her 17 years ago, and you buried it when you spent her future on theater tickets and handbags. The courtroom erupted in hushed murmurs. Reporters were already forming headlines. The judge raised a hand for silence, then straightened in his chair. His eyes pierced Elena, and his words became something more than a ruling. They became an indictment of her character. You claimed sacrifice, but sacrifice feeds. It does not starve. You claimed love, but love shelters. It does not abandon. You claimed motherhood, but motherhood protects. It does not exploit. The rhythm hit like hammer blows, each line stripping away the last of Elena's facade. Elena whimpered, shaking her head. No, I did what I could. But the judge wasn't finished. His tone hardened, his cadence transforming into something larger than the trial, larger than the room. You called it sacrifice. The court calls it theft. You called it motherhood. The court calls it fraud. You called it justice. The court calls it judgment. The words echoed, rolling through the chamber like thunder. Each repetition pinned Elena deeper into her chair. She broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking mascara into black rivers. Her shoulders convulsed with sobs. For the first time in 17 years, she wasn't the one in control. The judge paused, letting the silence consume her collapse. Cameras zoomed in on her face, catching every flicker of despair, every tear that stained her mask. Then he lifted the gavel one last time. Actions have consequences. And today those consequences came home. Crack. Crack. The gavel struck with finality. The sound reverberated, rattling the microphones, even shaking the water glasses on the tables. Elena jolted as though the sound had struck her body. Her sobs broke louder, collapsing into her hands. Maya inhaled sharply. Her chest rose, steady for the first time in the trial. Chloe rested a hand on her shoulder, eyes glistening but proud. The gallery surged with energy. Reporters whispered feverishly. Parents squeezed their children tighter. Clerks looked at each other with quiet awe. The judge stood, robe swaying, and left the bench. The authority of his presence lingered like smoke after fire. In the vacuum that followed, the cameras zoomed one last time. A tight shot of Elena Brooks, once the accuser, now the condemned, her tears shining under the fluorescent lights. The verdict had fallen, and justice had spoken. The gavel's echo had faded, but its weight lingered. In the days and weeks that followed, the case of Elena versus Bay, Maya left consequences far beyond the four walls of that courtroom. Elena Brooks had walked in wearing Prada, her perfume sharp, her head high. She left in silence, escorted by deputies, her face pale and swollen from tears, her reputation shattered beyond repair. The official court record bore a line that would follow her to her grave. Fraudulent claim, misuse of survivor benefits. Friends turned away. Employers refused her calls, her neighbors whispered. She was no longer the martyr she had once pretended to be. She was a cautionary tale, a headline parents pointed to when explaining betrayal to their children. For Maya Brooks, the verdict was more than vindication, it was liberation. At 19, she had carried the weight of abandonment, guilt, and suspicion. Now, the record itself testified, she was never at fault. She was never ungrateful. She was a child wronged, not a child who owed. Her acceptance letter to Rutgers University had already been pinned to her bedroom wall. But after the trial, it came with something more. A scholarship committee, moved by her testimony, awarded her a full scholarship in public policy. The irony was poetic. The girl whose childhood had been exploited would now study to protect others from the same fate. Beside her, Chloe Carter transformed from silent guardian into a public symbol. She had once been known only as the older sister who stepped in. Now she was the federal guardian who never gave up. Journalists clamored for interviews. Law schools invited her to speak on guardianship abuse. Parents wrote letters thanking her for proving that sometimes family is chosen, and the chosen family can be stronger than blood. But the true aftermath wasn't in headlines or scholarships. It was in the ripple effect. Hundreds of miles away, in a small Texas town, a 15-year-old boy named Adrian Lopez sat in front of his laptop watching clips of the trial. His situation mirrored Maya's in chilling ways. His father had died when he was 7, and his uncle had been entrusted with his survivor benefits. Adrian had long suspected something was wrong. The lights in his home flickered from unpaid bills, meals were scarce, and yet his uncle drove a brand new truck and wore designer boots. When Adrian saw Chloe hold up the timeline of misused funds, something sparked inside him. He recognized the pattern. He wasn't crazy, he wasn't ungrateful. He was a victim too. With trembling hands, he printed out bank statements he had secretly saved, circled the same kinds of indulgent transactions, and took them to a local pro bono attorney. 3 months later, Adrian won his case. The judge ordered his uncle to repay over $18,000 in misused benefits. For the first time in years, Adrian bought his own textbooks and a proper pair of shoes for school. When a reporter asked him how he found the courage, Adrian simply said, "Because Maya did it first. Call." Back in New Jersey, a young clerk named Danielle Rivera had sat at the edge of the courtroom, her job limited to stamping documents, shuffling exhibits, and typing transcripts. She had watched dozens of trials, robberies, divorces, custody disputes, but none had pierced her heart like this one. She had seen Maya's trembling hands, Chloe's unwavering stance, and Elena's collapse under the weight of her lies. Danielle had watched Chloe reveal her federal badge, and in that moment she knew she didn't want to spend her career pushing paper. She wanted to fight. The day after the verdict, Danielle walked into her supervisor's office and announced she would be applying to law school. Years later, she would become one of the state's leading child advocacy attorneys, dedicating her life to protecting children whose benefits, rights, or voices were stolen. In interviews, she often cited a single sentence that had changed her path. Fraud is not a family problem. It's a national epidemic. Among the hundreds of letters Chloe received after the trial, one stood out. It came on lined notebook paper, written in the careful script of a 12-year-old girl named Sarah from Ohio. The letter read, "Dear Ms. Carter, because of you, I'm not afraid to speak in court anymore. My foster mom has been keeping my allowance money and telling me it's for food, but I know it's not true. I'm going to tell the judge. If you could help Maya, maybe someone can help me too. Thank you for showing me it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to fight anyway. Love, Sarah." Chloe wept when she read it. She wrote back, promising Sarah that she was not alone. That simple letter became her most treasured possession, proof that the fight wasn't just one for Maya, but for countless others. The courthouse where the trial had taken place stood on Main Street, an ordinary brick building with nothing remarkable about it. But after the case, it became something more. At the urging of child advocacy groups, the county voted to dedicate a plaque in its main hall. The words engraved into the brass glimmered beneath the fluorescent lights, "Hall of True Guardianship," and beneath it, a single line that would outlive the case, the lawyers, even the bricks themselves. Children's futures are not for sale. Every morning, clerks, judges, and lawyers passed beneath those words, and every morning Maya's story whispered through the hallways like a reminder that justice wasn't abstract. It was lived, fought for, and protected. For Elena, there was no redemption arc. Her name was etched into the court record under fraudulent claim. She could not escape it. Job applications returned unanswered. Old friends avoided her at grocery stores. Landlords refused her. She spent her days alone in a small apartment. The Prada handbag that once symbolized power now shoved into the back of a closet, too painful to look at. She had thought herself the hero of her own story. Instead, she had become its villain. Her collapse served as a warning to others. Indulgence can be hidden for years, but truth waits patiently, and when it arrives, it devours everything. For Maya, the aftermath was not about her mother's disgrace. It was about reclaiming her life. She walked across the Rutgers campus with a backpack full of textbooks and a heart full of purpose. Professors asked her to share her story in classes. Student groups invited her to speak about resilience. At night, when she studied under dim dorm lights, she thought about her father, the man whose benefits had been stolen. She vowed to honor him not with tears, but with action. Her essay for her scholarship ended with a line she now lived by: "I was never powerless. I was only waiting for the moment to speak." The trial of Elena versus Sigh. Problem of verse. Maya began as a bitter family dispute. It ended as a national symbol. Elena lost her reputation. Maya gained her future. Chloe became an icon of protection. And beyond them, other children, clerks, and families found courage in their story. The courthouse doors still open and close each day, carrying in strangers, disputes, new cases. But now, anyone who enters reads the plaque above the hallway and feels the weight of its promise. Children's futures are not for sale. And, because of Maya Brooks, the world believes it. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung open, and for the first time in weeks, Maya Brooks stepped into the daylight not as a defendant, not as a trembling child, but as someone free. The air was thick with noise, reporters shouting her name, camera shutters firing like machine guns, microphones thrust forward. The courtyard outside the courthouse looked less like a civic space and more like a battlefield of flashbulbs and headlines. She squinted under the barrage of light. For a heartbeat, the chaos threatened to swallow her. Then Chloe's hand tightened around hers. That simple gesture grounded her, pulled her back into focus. They walked forward together, shoulder to shoulder. Chloe, tall and steady, the guardian who had never abandoned. Maya, 19, small but unbroken, carrying words heavy enough to silence the storm. Reporters shouted questions. "Maya, how do you feel? Tsk, do you forgive your mother? Ka, what will you do now?" Maya stopped. She turned toward the cluster of cameras. The flashlights painted her face in white bursts. Her chest rose, steady, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Silence only feeds injustice," she began, her voice steady, cutting through the din. "Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story so no child ever pays twice, once for loss, once for betrayal. The courtyard stilled. For the first time, the crowd wasn't shouting questions. They were listening. Maya's gaze shifted. Slowly, deliberately, she looked past the reporters, past the crowd, straight into the camera lens. Breaking the wall between her and the millions who would watch from phones, laptops, and televisions, she spoke to them directly. "If you're watching this," she said, her eyes unwavering, "maybe you're the child who lost. Maybe you're the parent who left. Hear me now. Lies kill faster than fists. Share this story." The effect was electric. Reporters shifted uncomfortably as if the judgment had turned on them. Parents in the crowd clutched their children tighter. Somewhere far away, in living rooms and shelters and bedrooms where kids sat in silence, Maya's words were reaching ears that had waited too long to hear them. Chloe stepped closer, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. She leaned in, her voice low but meant for the microphones. "Actions have consequences," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Tonight, justice wasn't just served, it was reclaimed. The words detonated across the courtyard. Flashbulbs fired faster. Reporters gasped. The sentence was short enough to be quoted, strong enough to trend, and true enough to last. Maya exhaled, finally letting her shoulders relax. Chloe gave her a small smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face like she had done when Maya was a child. And then they turned, walking together through the storm of cameras and lights. Behind them, the courthouse doors closed. Inside, the record of fraud would remain, etched into permanence. Outside, a different record was being written, not on paper but in memory, in headlines, in the whispered courage of children who now knew they weren't alone. The crowd roared questions again, but it didn't matter. The message had already been delivered. The cameras had captured what needed capturing. Later that night, the clips would play on news broadcasts, spread across social media, spliced into 30-second videos with captions bold enough to pierce even the shortest attention spans. And beneath every clip, one line would be shared, repeated, retyped, whispered like a vow. "Share this story so the silence can finally be seen."